So this video is going to be a little bit personal. I'm going to talk about my history with migraines and some of the ways I've found to overcome migraines, and also some of the struggles inherent in having the chronic problem of migraines. It's kind of an interesting thing because there's no medical cure for migraines, and a lot of people really aren't sure exactly why migraines happen. People who have migraines will know that they have certain triggers, so it could be the weather. For me, it's almost always, and I think for almost everyone, it tends to be food-based. So if you there are certain foods which cause you to have a migraine. It's kind of almost like a stress reaction where all of a sudden your body goes out of sync, your brain kind of goes haywire, and it's a headache, but it's a very bad tension headache. It's almost a full body, often like flu symptoms. So if I don't avoid a migraine quickly, the easy thing that people tell you to do is if you feel like a migraine might be coming on, you take a big dose of something like a painkiller. So there's migraine medicine, which is basically aspirin and acetaminophen and caffeine. So those three together are kind of migraine pills. There's a lot of different companies that make them. And if you catch it early enough and you take one of those, then you may not get the headache, and that's great. But if you do get the headache, there's really no cure for it. So my migraines tend to be, twice a month I'll get a migraine. They'll knock me out for a day. I'll be like on the ground by the toilet in the bathroom because your whole body just feels like shit. It's a pounding pain in your head, but then you're also sick to your stomach and vomiting. I tend to feel relief if I vomit, everything I've eaten. Then I'll feel better. I'll be able to sleep for a couple hours. So it's a really weird thing because I'm not terminally ill. It's not a long-term problem. Most days I feel totally fine, but sometimes I get migraines and they can put me completely out of whack. So I had a conference, I'm in Lisbon, and there was a conference a couple days ago, and the second day of the conference I got a migraine, which is also just like changes in your sleep schedule. Too much stress or whatever can make you more prone to getting migraines. And I really wanted to go to the conference the second day, so I got up early. I kind of felt like I could be getting one, but I went, and I got really sick at the conference. So at the conference, I was trying to listen, people were trying to talk to me, and I was just like, blah. So I had to leave and take a car back to the apartment where I got really sick. So it's a pretty difficult condition to live with. There are some things you can take and do for migraine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have helped me. I know a lot of migraine sufferers, they get all sorts of advice all the time, and they're probably sick of hearing it. A lot of migraine sufferers say like, I have a migraine, but please don't give me any advice because I've already researched everything. However, like when I didn't really know I had migraines for a long time because my migraines are abdominal, which means I get sick to my stomach and I throw up even if I don't have a headache. So I didn't know that there was a thing as abdominal migraines. That's not as common. I didn't know that was my problem. I think a lot of people get headaches or they get sick and they don't necessarily know it's migraines, and they may not know that it's food trigger. I have an uncle who I'm sure, because migraines are kind of hereditary, I'm sure he has the same food and digestion problems that I have, but he doesn't think that food is the problem, so he doesn't change his diet. When I was getting really sick with migraines, it was getting worse and worse, and so I had to stop eating almost everything. I was living in Taiwan. MSG is a big migraine trigger, so I had to try not to eat MSG, which is really difficult in Taiwan, but there are other really common migraine triggers like wine or cheese or anything cured or aged, anything with triptans. If you really dig deep in the chemical functions of the brain, you can kind of figure out some of the food triggers that are going to cause problems for you, but also people tell you to keep a food diary and just be really careful about what you eat or when you get migraines to identify the triggers so that you can avoid them. But that's really a pain in the ass. And I mean, yes, that's important, but I've been much more interested in finding things that keep me from getting migraines. So the big breakthrough was when a doctor prescribed, my dad gets migraines or tension headaches, so a doctor prescribed him amitriptyline. Amitriptyline is a low dosage tricyclic antidepressant. So there's a lot of off-label pharmaceuticals that are used for migraines, even though they weren't developed for migraines. So amitriptyline is one of those. It worked really well. I was almost surprised. This was, I was in Taiwan. I was getting migraines like all the time. I couldn't eat hardly anything. It's really limiting. The first time I took amitriptyline, it kind of like, I wasn't used to the dose, and it kind of just knocked me out because I just felt so relaxed, and I was driving my scooter and I was just like, psh, but I wasn't used to it. The nice thing about amitriptyline is you can take a low dose of 10 or 20 mg per day. It's not the dose that you would take to if you had depression. So even though it's an antidepressant, you're not really taking it for depression. You're just taking it to keep your brain blood balance a little more stable so it doesn't flip out and do weird things. I found that it does work really well. One of the side effects of amitriptyline is that it causes weight gain. So one of the problems is it made me really tired and it caused me to gain weight, which I didn't like those symptoms. So I've switched to nortriptyline, which is it's not as good or as powerful as amitriptyline, but it allows me to most of the time keep most of the headaches away, and it doesn't have as many side effects. So that's what I take most of the time. I've been taking that for probably 7 years or something, but it wasn't working all of the time. So I also have started taking propranolol. Propranolol is a beta blocker that regulates basically your heart rate and your blood pumping. So it's really good for, I've heard actually, because I have a background in academia, some professors or public speakers take propranolol when they're giving a speech, because it, like if you have a fear of public speaking, and every time you get up on stage, your heart starts to pound and you have that whole body fight or flight response and you're stressing out, it makes you like, if I'm giving a speech, my hands will shake, even if if I want to raise my hand in class and say something. So if you have, that's a physiological response, it's difficult to overcome, but if you take something like propranolol, it can help you to keep calm and balanced. So I found if I take, a little bit of both of those every day as preventative medications, that will keep away most of my migraines most of the time, but not all of the time. And there are other things with migraine medication. There's preventative and there's abortive. So preventative medication is something you take daily that helps you to ward off most of the migraines. There's also abortive medication that you can take when you get a migraine to stop the migraine. I've also tried most of those, and they make me really sick. So they make me sicker than the migraine would, because the migraine I know what to expect, it sucks, but after a few hours I'll be able to sleep it off. Some of these abortive medications, for 8 hours I'll feel like shit and my whole day is ruined. So I'm really skeptical of those. I know they work for some people. I think for migraines you have to experiment and find something that works for you. However, a couple other things that I'll mention is marijuana for migraines has been pretty awesome. I lived in Oregon some of the times. I'm from Oregon. Oregon now has recreational legal marijuana, which means you don't need a medical license, but in a lot of states they do have medical marijuana, so you can apply for a medical marijuana license for migraines, and it is very effective. I'll make another video just talking about marijuana specifically, but there's indica and sativa. Sativa is more uplifting and energizing. Indica is more of a depressant. It'll make you relaxed. So you could use it before you go to bed. It'll help you sleep. And it is really good for preventing migraines. You don't, like some of the other drugs like the propranolol and the amitriptyline, it just kind of keeps you on an even level. It helps you to keep you calmer so your brain doesn't freak out and do weird things. It can sometimes have a good effect. Not always. I've tried this when I actually get a migraine, if I can stop the migraine with marijuana. That doesn't seem to be the case. I will also mention nicotine or cigarettes, because that's the same thing as hit and miss. Nicotine and smoking cigarettes can be really good for nausea, so it can sometimes help if you get migraines with nausea. And nicotine by itself as a stimulant can be good for migraine abortive prevention. Even I've tried, if you get a migraine, having a nicotine patch that gives you a quick shot of nicotine, or even the nicotine mints that you can take. I would experiment with those, because I think nicotine is a really interesting stimulant that potentially helps reduce migraines or abort migraines. So it's something really easy that you could experiment with. I think marijuana works really well to cut down on the severity of migraines. So if that's an option for you, depending on where you live in the world or which state you live in, I think that's something you can easily research. There are different strains of marijuana that work better for migraine prevention. So hopefully if you live somewhere where marijuana is legal, you can experiment with different strains until you find one that works really well for you and makes you feel better and takes away the severity of your migraine symptoms. But other than that, I mean, you really have to do a lot of experimentation, test a lot of things out, figure out what foods you can't eat, because definitely migraine triggers, like there are definitely going to be some big migraine triggers that are diet related, and if you know that those foods make you sick, you have to try to stop eating those foods. And then if you can try something like amitriptyline or nortriptyline or propranolol, where you take them every day, there are several other preventative medications, and sometimes you have to test lots of them to find what works for you. For me, I found a double dose of propranolol and amitriptyline, and like I said, I take very tiny doses. It's like 10 mg of both. So for example, a regular aspirin is like 200 to 500 mg of painkiller. So to take 10 mg of something else, it's really not a huge dose. And you could even, I think my dad takes 25 mg, and I've been trying not to go up to a higher dose, even though I've been taking this for a long time. And I probably do need to move up to a higher dose because I've gotten used to the medication. It stopped being as effective for me. I also don't want to take a lot of medication if I don't have to. So I try to just take like the bare minimum to keep my migraines away most of the time. I might make another video about creativity, creative genius, and migraine, because there's an interesting connection with, there's a book called Brain Wider Than the Sky that talks about the history of, I think especially Emily Dickinson and migraines. I did a paper in school about how Emily Dickinson's poetry can really be related to specific migraine symptoms and the accounts of what migraineurs say they feel, especially stuff like hearing voices or hearing music or steady pumping or pain. There's a lot. If you read Emily Dickinson's literature, her poetry, as a migrainer, I think that's really fascinating, and I recommend you do that. But hopefully, there's no cure for migraines. So all you can do is prevent them as well as you can, deal with them when you get them. Hopefully you don't get them every day, but if you do, definitely find anything that works for you that improves your quality of life. I think like I'm not devastated that I have migraines, because like I said, I might get a few a month, but I'm otherwise generally healthy, and most days I can be very productive. So I'm very lucky that I don't have a chronic debilitating disease or pain that a lot of other writers have. I think it's common for writers to have debilitating chronic illnesses, which I think is, on the one hand, that's terrible. On the other hand, it's likely that those inabilities to function in a normal job pushes them to develop their creativity and become writers, where they can have kind of a self-employed lifestyle. So it's kind of it's an interesting feature of the writing community that a lot of us have some kind of sickness or I have a lot of writing friends who have migraines, so I think it's very common in writerly circles to get headaches or to get migraines. Anyway, I hope that by sharing this video, maybe I've mentioned some things that help you. I think also just knowing that other people are dealing with this, and that you can still have a very fulfilling, productive life even if you get migraines. It's good to know that like you're not alone in having this. And also there are certain cool things, like after you get a migraine, you have an aura. Like before and after you get a migraine, you have a very specific symptoms of brain activity that are abnormal and unusual to the common public. So there are the potential to get into a very creative, high production, idea generating state of mind that most of the public never has access to, because you have migraine symptoms, which I think is not necessarily, well, I don't want to say something I'm grateful for, but definitely something I appreciate, because some of my really big ideas have probably come during non-peak mind states where I'm recovering from or going into a migraine episode. So that's kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot of books about migraine and creativity. That's something I'm very interested in researching myself. So some of my nonfiction books, for example, I'm going to write a book called The Creative Brain on Drugs. I'll probably talk a lot more about this kind of stuff. But I hope this video helps a little bit. Maybe I've introduced you to some ideas that might help you to cut down on the severity of your migraine symptoms. If so, I wish you the best of luck with that. Feel free to comment down below with your own personal, if you've had any discoveries of your own, either things that you found about migraines and creativity, or migraines and productivity, or anything you've discovered that have helped you to deal with living with migraines. That would be great to hear from you about your experiences. Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye.